Picture yourself kneeling in a field at the edge of the world, hands buried in warm, dark earth. The sun is setting, painting everything amber. You are harvesting something precious, something that does not entirely belong to you. You know this, and yet you cannot stop. You were made for this. That feeling, that strange mixture of purpose and guilt, may be closer to our ancient origins than most people dare to consider. The Sumerian tablets, among the oldest written records ever discovered, describe a moment in deep prehistory when beings known as the Anunnaki faced a crisis. Their home world, a planet ancient Sumerian texts call Nibiru, required enormous quantities of gold, not for decoration or wealth as we understand it, but to repair and sustain an atmosphere in catastrophic decline. Gold, with its extraordinary reflective and conductive properties, was their solution to a planetary emergency. So they came here, to Earth, and they began to mine. For thousands of years, according to these tablets, the Anunnaki themselves performed this labour in the goldfields of what we now call southern Africa. Archaeological evidence, including some of the oldest known mining sites on Earth, discovered near Swaziland and Zimbabwe, suggests mining activity dating back over 100,000 years, far beyond the timeline of any known human civilization. But labour breeds exhaustion, and exhaustion eventually demands a reckoning. When the Anunnaki workers, called the Ijigi, finally revolted, refusing to descend into the mines any longer, their leaders faced an extraordinary choice. Create a new kind of worker, one built for toil, one fashioned from the very earth being harvested. That worker, the tablets suggest, was us, and so the harvest continued. Only now, the hands doing the digging were our own, forbidden in origin perhaps, but undeniably, deeply human. Imagine waking from a dream so long and so deep that you have forgotten your own name. The room around you is strange, the faces peering down at you are unfamiliar, and somewhere buried beneath years of forgetting is the truth of who you were before you closed your eyes. That image, the sleeping giant stirring, appears in cultures across the entire world, from Norse mythology to Native American legend, from Irish folklore to the ancient stories carved into Mesopotamian clay, and the Sumerian tablets offer a startling possibility for why. The texts describe the Anunnaki not as immortal in the absolute sense, but as extraordinarily long-lived beings. Their leaders, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, are depicted living across timescales that dwarf entire human civilizations. Thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands, spent on Earth before their eventual departure. Scientists studying certain deep geological formations in places like the Buchigi Mountains of Romania, the cave systems beneath the Giza Plateau, and subterranean chambers in Turkey have occasionally encountered what they describe as anomalous structures, too regular, too precise to be natural, yet far too ancient to be attributed to any known civilization. Some researchers, working outside mainstream acceptance, have proposed that these may be the resting places of beings who once walked among early humans as gods, giants by human standards, sleeping now in chambers sealed against the passing of ordinary time. Is it fantasy? Perhaps, but consider how many independent cultures with no contact between them arrived at the same story. Giants, sleepers, gods who lay down and did not rise again. When a myth appears on every continent, it stops being coincidence. It starts feeling like memory. What if the giants are not a story we invented? What if they are a story we witnessed and simply never forgot? Think about the last time you looked in a mirror and saw something of your mother or your father looking back at you. A familiar curve of the jaw, eyes that belong to someone else's face. We carry our ancestors in our bodies without even thinking about it. Now consider how far back that inheritance might actually reach. The Sumerian tablets describe a moment of extraordinary intimacy between the Anunnaki and early humans. Enki, one of the principal Anunnaki figures and described consistently as a god of wisdom and creation, is said to have played a direct role in the genetic fashioning of humanity. The tablets use language that, when translated carefully, speaks of mixing essences, of combining something divine with something earthly. Modern geneticists have noted something deeply puzzling about the human genome. Roughly 49 years ago, when scientists first mapped the full sequence of human DNA, they discovered something they struggled to explain. Certain segments of our genetic code appear suddenly, without clear evolutionary predecessors. These sections, sometimes informally called junk DNA, have been a source of scientific debate ever since. Some researchers, including the late geneticist and author Lloyd Pye, argued that the accelerated appearance of modern human cognitive capability, our language, our abstract thought, our capacity for symbolic culture, happened too fast for standard evolutionary models to explain comfortably. Could there be a hidden lineage buried in our cells? A signature left by architects who built us with intention? The tablets suggest that certain human bloodlines carried more of this divine inheritance than others, that kings and priests were chosen not merely by power, but by genetics, by closeness to the source. You may think of yourself as ordinary, but your blood is ancient, and ancient things carry secrets that even silence cannot fully erase. Have you ever disagreed with someone in authority? Not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, in the small choices you made every day. A slight adjustment here. A door left, unlocked there. That gentle, persistent resistance that asks no permission and announces no manifesto. History's most powerful rebellions rarely begin with a shout. The Sumerian tablets record one of the earliest and most significant acts of defiance in any written tradition. Enki, brother to the ruling Anunnaki lord Enlil, was repeatedly instructed to limit humanity, to keep the human creation controlled, subservient, incapable of too much growth, too much knowledge, too much autonomy. And Enki, slowly, quietly, refused. When Enlil sent floods to reduce human population, it was Enki who whispered warnings. When laws were passed restricting human advancement, it was Enki who found subtle ways to pass knowledge downward, through dreams, through chosen individuals, through what the tablets call the Mes, sacred objects containing the knowledge of civilization itself. He did not overthrow his brother. He did not declare war. He simply chose, again and again, to extend a hand rather than withdraw it. This tension between Enki and Enlil runs through nearly every major Sumerian myth like a quiet current beneath a wide river. Two brothers, two visions of what humanity could be. One wanted restraint, one wanted flourishing, and here we are, flourishing, complicated, brilliantly flawed, which suggests that at least one of them succeeded. There is something deeply comforting in this ancient story, the idea that even among gods, someone chose compassion. Someone looked at the creation and said, no, they deserve more than this. Perhaps every act of quiet kindness carries a little of that ancient rebellion in it. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in absolute darkness. Not the soft darkness of a bedroom at night, the total, unrelenting darkness of a world before fire, before light, before the first glowing ember was coaxed into existence by hands that understood what they were doing. Now imagine the moment that fire appears. Every major civilization on Earth has a version of this story. In Greek mythology, it is Prometheus who steals fire from the gods and delivers it to shivering, vulnerable humanity, paying an eternal price for the gift. In Vedic tradition, the fire-bearer Agni bridges the divine and the mortal realms. In Aztec legend, gods sacrifice themselves to become the sun. The pattern is so consistent it borders on the impossible. The Sumerian tablets give this story its oldest known form. The knowledge of civilization, agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, law is described not as something humanity discovered slowly through patient trial and error, but as something gifted, transmitted, loaned from beings who already possessed it. The Mes, those sacred tablets of destiny described throughout Sumerian literature, were said to contain the complete blueprint for a functioning civilization. Enki held them, and piece by piece, according to the texts, he passed them to the cities of ancient Sumer. Here is what makes archaeologists quietly uneasy. The Sumerian civilization appears in the historical record with extraordinary suddenness. Agriculture, writing, formal government, architectural planning, all of it emerging within a remarkably compressed window of time, roughly around 5,000 years before the Common Era. There is no long, fumbling developmental period. It is as if someone handed humanity the instruction manual. Borrowed fireworms just as well as fire you found yourself, but it always carries the memory of the hand that gave it. Think about the last time you were truly exhausted, not tired in the ordinary sense, but bone-deep weary, the kind of fatigue where even the things you love most begin to feel like obligations, where the work that once gave you meaning starts to feel like a weight you can no longer lift without resentment. Now imagine feeling that way about an entire planet. The Sumerian tablets, read carefully across their full breadth, reveal something that rarely gets discussed in popular accounts. The Anunnaki, for all their power and longevity, were not immune to exhaustion. The texts describe their time on Earth not as a triumphant conquest, but as a long, difficult, frequently troubled posting. Enlil, in particular, grows progressively darker across the tablet narratives. He begins as a figure of authority and order, but over thousands of years of dealing with the expanding, noisy, increasingly independent human population he helped bring into existence, his temperament curdles. The tablets describe him lamenting the clamour of humanity, keeping him awake, growing irritable, becoming vindictive. This is not the behaviour of an all-powerful divine being effortlessly presiding over creation. This is the behaviour of someone who has been at the same impossible job for far too long. The Anunnaki were not eternal in spirit, even if they were long-lived in body. They had disputes, jealousies, broken relationships, and ideological conflicts that the tablets document with surprising intimacy. They mourned, they raged, they grieved. Perhaps this is why they left, not because they were driven away, not because they were defeated, but because they were simply done, finished with the weight of a mission that had stretched across geological time. Even gods, it seems, can burn out, and in that strange, unexpected vulnerability, they become, almost, relatable. Have you ever watched the night sky long enough to feel the earth moving beneath you? That subtle, almost imperceptible shift, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient, patient arc, can produce something close to vertigo, a sudden awareness that you are not standing still, that everything is in motion. That time itself is a kind of orbit. Ancient people knew this, and the Sumerians knew it better than almost anyone. The Sumerian understanding of celestial mechanics was, by any reasonable measure, breathtaking. They identified all of the planets in our solar system, including those only confirmed by modern telescopes. They calculated the length of a solar year with a precision that rivals contemporary measurements. They developed the base 60 numerical system that we still use today for measuring time and angles, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. These were not lucky guesses. This was systematic, sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The tablets speak of a celestial body they called Nibiru, a planet on a long elliptical orbit that brought it into the inner solar system once every 3,600 years. This orbit, the texts suggest, connected Anunnaki arrivals and departures to a precise cosmic timetable. Mainstream astronomers have long sought a large, undiscovered planet in the outer solar system to explain gravitational anomalies observed in the orbits of distant objects. Some researchers have called this hypothetical body Planet 9. The orbital characteristics proposed for it bear a striking, if unconfirmed, resemblance to what the Sumerian tablets describe as Nibiru. Consider what it means if even part of this is true, that the ancients were reading the same cosmic clocks we are still learning to decipher. Time, it turns out, is not a river, it is a wheel, and someone taught us to watch it turn. Picture yourself hiking through a dense forest and coming across a stone carved with markings you do not recognize. You run your fingers across the grooves. They are deliberate, intentional. Someone made this and placed it here, wanting it to be found, wanting to say something across an impossible distance of time. What do you do with a warning you cannot fully read? Across the ancient world, in places separated by thousands of miles of ocean and mountain, human beings left behind the same kinds of marks. Monolithic stones engraved with astronomical alignments. Underground chambers sealed with unusual precision. Artifacts constructed from materials that should not have been available to the civilizations that supposedly made them. The Sumerian tablets are themselves, in many ways, a form of buried warning. They record not only history but prophecy, cycles of destruction and renewal tied to the return of cosmic forces and the decisions of beings far more powerful than any earthly king. Göbekli Tepe, a site in southern Turkey discovered and excavated beginning in 1994, has permanently unsettled the conventional timeline of human civilization. 12,000 years old, older than agriculture, older than any previously known monument, it is a complex of intricately carved stone pillars depicting animals and symbols of startling artistic sophistication. Who built it? Why did they bury it deliberately, filling it in with earth rather than abandoning it, as if preserving it from something they feared would come? Some researchers believe it was built as a record, a message, a marker intended to survive whatever catastrophe was coming. The Sumerian tablets describe similar impulses, the hiding of sacred knowledge before floods, before wars, before the departure of those who held the deepest understanding. Perhaps the most haunting thing about buried warnings is this: they only exist because someone knew they would be needed. Someone looked forward into the darkness and chose to leave a light. Have you ever woken from a dream convinced it meant something, that underneath the strange symbols and fragmented images was a message trying to reach you? You lie still in the early morning quiet, chasing the meaning before it dissolves. Sometimes it holds, sometimes it slips away like water through open fingers. Now imagine an entire civilization that treated dreams not as psychological curiosities, but as direct transmissions from divine intelligence. Throughout the Sumerian tablets and the broader ancient Mesopotamian literary tradition, dreams occupy a position of extraordinary importance. Kings received instructions through dreams. Priests were trained as dream interpreters. The boundary between sleeping and divine communication was considered permeable, a membrane rather than a wall. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written narratives on Earth, is saturated with prophetic dreaming. Gilgamesh himself receives visions that his mother, the goddess Ninsun, decodes with careful precision. The dreams are not random, they carry structured information. The Sumerian word for dream, Mamu, was associated directly with the divine realm, the place from which the Anunnaki were believed to operate. Modern neuroscience has begun to explore the function of dreaming with remarkable results. REM sleep, during which the most vivid dreaming occurs, is now understood to be essential for memory consolidation, emotional processing, and the integration of complex information. Some researchers have proposed that dreaming may represent the brain's own attempt to make meaning from the patterns and signals it absorbs during waking life. What if the ancients were doing the same thing, but understood the process as incoming rather than generated? What if their cosmology had simply drawn the map differently, placing the source outside rather than within? The message may be identical, only the direction of the arrow changes. Dreams have always carried more than sleep. They carry the oldest questions dressed in the night's own language. stand at the edge of a place where a great city once stood. Not the ruins, before the ruins, when it was alive, when 10,000 voices filled the air with commerce and argument and laughter and prayer. Can you feel the ghost of it, the outline of something immense that simply ceased? There is a particular quality to places where civilization has vanished completely. An absence so thorough it becomes its own presence. The Sumerian tablets describe cities of extraordinary antiquity, settlements that preceded the Great Flood narrative by tens of thousands of years. The King's List, a remarkable document inscribed on a Sumerian prism dating to around 2,170 years before the Common Era, records the names and reign lengths of kings stretching back into what it simply calls before the flood. Those pre-flood cities, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larsa, Sippar and Shuruppak, are described in the tablets with specific geographical coordinates and cultural characteristics, not as myth, but as history. Here is the unsettling part. Eridu, traditionally considered the world's oldest city, has been excavated. It exists. It sits in the southern Iraqi desert, and its lowest archaeological layers push the boundaries of what mainstream history comfortably accepts. Beyond that, researchers studying the now submerged continental shelves of the Persian Gulf have found evidence of extensive flooding events that would have inundated vast habitable lowland areas roughly 8,000 years ago, precisely the geographic zone where the Sumerian pre-flood cities were said to have stood. Cities do not vanish cleanly. They leave echoes in sediment, in story, in the shape of the myths we keep returning to. The Sumerians remembered their drowned cities with a clarity that suggests lived experience, not invention. They named the streets. They named the kings. They named the gods who walked through them. You do not grieve that specifically for something you only imagined. Think about the last time you entered a building so perfectly designed that it made you feel something, calm, uplifted, small, in the best possible way. Architecture at its finest does not merely shelter, it communicates. It encodes intention in stone and geometry and light. Now ask yourself, who taught the first architects? The ancient world is full of structures that by all conventional reasoning should not exist. The precision of the Great Pyramid of Giza, its alignment to true north accurate to within 3/100ths of a degree, its internal chambers engineered to a tolerance finer than modern building codes require. The massive stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, cut with angles and interlocking joints that challenge the capabilities of contemporary stone-cutting technology. Sacsayhuam in Peru, where blocks weighing over 100 tons were fitted together without mortar, so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot be inserted between them. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki as master builders. Enki, the great craftsman among them, is credited with designing and overseeing the construction of the earliest Sumerian temples, the ziggurats, which were not merely places of worship but, according to the texts, functional dwellings and communication platforms for the Anunnaki themselves. What if the extraordinary architectural achievements of the ancient world reflect a transmission of knowledge? Techniques learned from beings whose understanding of material science, acoustics, astronomy and geometry vastly exceeded what we credit to early human civilization. The architect leaves fingerprints in the building, even when the architect is never named. Around the world, those fingerprints appear. The same proportions, the same astronomical alignments, the same structural principles encoded in stone across cultures with no known contact. Someone drew the blueprint. Someone taught the builders. And then, quietly, the teachers disappeared, leaving only the buildings behind to ask the questions they no longer answer. Have you ever had to leave somewhere you had come to love? A home you had built slowly, room by room, year by year, and then found yourself standing at the door for the last time, looking back at what you were leaving behind. There is a particular grief in that moment, not the grief of loss by accident, The grief of a choice made when staying was no longer possible. The Sumerian tablets, in their later narratives, describe the Anunnaki not as conquerors departing in triumph, but as beings engaged in what can only be read as a painful withdrawal. The texts speak of the gods lifting into the sky as the great flood consumed the earth below, watching from above as the civilization they had built, the cities they had named, the people they had created, were swept beneath the water. Some of the tablets describe Anunnaki figures weeping. Ninhursag, the mother goddess credited with the fashioning of humanity, is recorded crying out at the sight of the destruction, even though the flood itself had been sanctioned by Enlil's council. This is not the behaviour of indifferent cosmic administrators. This is the behaviour of beings experiencing grief. Some researchers who study these texts suggest that the departure of the Anunnaki was not entirely voluntary, that external forces, whether the completion of their mission, the requirements of their home world, or the dynamics of their own internal politics, made remaining on Earth impossible. The word exile carries within it two ideas simultaneously: forced departure and the memory of belonging. You cannot be exiled from somewhere you were never home. If the Anunnaki wept as they rose above a drowning world, then somewhere in that water, somewhere in that specific sorrow, was the admission that Earth had become, against all original intention, something close to home. Even gods, it seems, can become attached to places they were only meant to visit. Consider gold for a moment, not the price of it, not the jewellery, the element itself. Pull it up from the context of human commerce and look at it plainly. A soft, heavy, almost absurdly rare metal that resists corrosion absolutely, conducts electricity with extraordinary efficiency, and reflects radiation with a purity no other common material matches. We use it in spacecraft, in medical implants, in the most sensitive electronic circuits ever designed. Gold does not merely symbolize value, it performs it on a molecular level. So why exactly did every ancient civilization treat gold as sacred beyond all rational explanation? The Sumerian tablets offer the most direct answer found in any ancient text. The Anunnaki, according to the cuneiform records, came to Earth specifically for gold, not for power in the human political sense, not for beauty, for survival. The tablets describe Nibiru, the Anunnaki homeworld, as suffering from a deteriorating atmosphere. The proposed solution, debated among their leadership, was to create a reflective shield of microscopic gold particles suspended in the upper atmosphere, a technology that modern scientists have actually proposed for Earth as a theoretical response to climate disruption. Gold particles suspended in the stratosphere can reflect incoming solar radiation. The physics are sound, the application is real. Now read the Sumerian tablets again with that knowledge in hand. Beings from a world with a failing atmosphere travelled to a planet rich in gold to mine what they needed to survive. And in doing so, they changed the course of an entirely different species forever. The golden artefacts found in ancient tombs across every culture on Earth, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Peru, China, were not merely ornamental. They were echoes of a technology so advanced it became indistinguishable from religion. Everything sacred carries the memory of something once desperately necessary. Imagine you are standing in a valley watching the rain fall for the third week in a row. The river at the edge of town has crept steadily up its banks. Your neighbours are moving belongings to upper floors, and somewhere in the back of your mind is the quiet fear that this time might be different. That this time the water might not stop. That fear is one of the oldest feelings in human experience, and it belongs to a memory that crosses every culture on Earth. Flood narratives appear in over 200 distinct cultural traditions worldwide. The Sumerian tablets give us the oldest written version, predating the Hebrew story of Noah by at least 1,000 years. In the Sumerian account, a man named Siasudra, later called Utnapishtim in the Akkadian retelling, and Atrahasis in another version, is warned by Enki to build a vessel. to preserve life, to survive what is coming. The warning comes in secret. Against the decision of the Anunnaki Council, Enki whispers through a wall, technically obeying the letter of his instruction not to warn humanity directly, while entirely violating its spirit. Geologists studying sediment layers in the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean have found evidence of massive, rapid flooding events corresponding to the period between 10,000 and 5,000 years before the Common Era. These were real events, not mythological. Entire coastlines, plains, and river valleys swallowed by rising water on a scale difficult to comprehend. The Sumerian tablets may not be mythology at all. They may be the oldest journalism we have, imperfect accounts of real catastrophes, filtered through cultural frameworks that translated survival into sacred narrative. Every culture that remembered the flood did so because someone survived to tell the story. The flood was real, the memory is real, and the whispered warning passed through whatever wall stood between disaster and survival. That may be the most real thing of all. Look up at the night sky on a clear night, far from city light, and let your eyes adjust to the dark. What opens above you is not empty space. It is a map. A crowded, ancient, deeply intentional map that human beings have been reading for as long as we have had eyes to look and minds to wonder. The ancients did not merely observe the stars, they built their entire civilizations in conversation with them. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki as beings who moved through space with purpose and direction, who understood the cosmos not as a backdrop but as a navigable landscape. The texts speak of celestial roads, pathways through the sky corresponding to specific constellations and planetary positions. Sumerian astronomical knowledge identified three great celestial bands: the way of Anu, the way of Enlil, and the way of Enki, each corresponding to a different zone of the sky. These divisions align remarkably well with ecliptic astronomy. The Sumerians calculated the precession of the equinoxes, a 25,920-year cycle of Earth's wobble, with an accuracy that should not have been achievable without centuries of meticulous observation and a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. Modern researchers studying the orientation of ancient monuments worldwide, from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat to the pyramids of Giza, have noted consistent alignments with specific star systems. Orion, the Pleiades, Sirius, the same stars revered across separated cultures, encoded into architecture designed to last forever. Star roads do not have to be literal highways through space. They can be something subtler, a shared understanding of direction, a common orientation toward the same points of light. The Anunnaki may have left Earth, but they left us facing the same sky they navigated, and perhaps that was never an accident. Perhaps the stars were always meant to be the address. We only forgot that we knew how to read them. Close your eyes and picture standing at the edge of a wide, slow river just before dawn. The air is cool and still. The surface of the water is perfectly flat, like a mirror laid across the earth, and as the first light touches it, the entire river seems to wake, glowing, breathing, alive. You feel, without quite knowing why, that this place is holy. That feeling is not imagination, it is memory. Water held a place of absolute reverence in ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, where Sumerian civilization first took root. And the Sumerian tablets reveal that this reverence was not merely poetic, it was cosmological. Enki, one of the most prominent of the Anunnaki figures, was the lord of the Abzu, a word that translates roughly as the primordial underground freshwater ocean. The Abzu was not simply a body of water. It was the source of all life, all wisdom, and all creative power in the Sumerian understanding of the cosmos. Enki's home, his base of operations on Earth, was said to rest within or upon it. ancient Sumer was built on water. Its cities rose from marshland. Its agriculture depended entirely on a sophisticated system of irrigation canals that ancient texts suggest were designed and overseen by the Anunnaki themselves. Hydrologists studying the ancient waterworks of southern Iraq have noted that the canal systems of early Sumer were not the product of gradual development. They appear with a completeness and engineering precision that implies deliberate advanced design from the outset. Water in the ancient world was not worshipped arbitrarily. It was worshipped because it was understood, truly, deeply understood, as the foundation of everything living, and perhaps the first engineers who understood it most completely were not human at all. Think about how much of your life is organized by a calendar. The rhythm of your week, the shape of your year, the way certain dates carry weight that others do not. Now imagine waking up one morning to find that every calendar in the world had vanished, and that you had to rebuild the entire system of time from nothing, using only the sky. Where would you even begin? The Sumerians began apparently with extraordinary precision, and the tablets they left behind suggest they may not have started from nothing at all. The Sumerian calendar was lunisolar, tracking both the cycles of the moon and the movement of the sun simultaneously. It divided the year into 12 months of 29 to 30 days each, with an intercalary month inserted periodically to keep the calendar aligned with the solar year. This is a system of considerable mathematical sophistication, requiring careful observation and calculation across many generations. But the tablets suggest something even more ambitious. The Anunnaki, according to the Sumerian texts, operated on a timescale tied to the orbital period of their homeworld, Nibiru. One Nibiru year, called a Sar in the tablets, corresponded to 3,600 Earth years. The Sumerian Kings List records pre-flood rains measured in these units, producing seemingly impossible lengths when converted to Earth years, but perfectly coherent when understood as a different civilization's natural unit of time. Consider what this means. Every calendar reflects the sky its creators lived beneath. The Sumerians recorded not one set of cosmic rhythms, but two, their own, and the visiting civilization that arrived by a different clock entirely. We have never lost our instinct to measure time. We have only forgotten how many different kinds of time there are to measure. Step outside on a clear day and look straight up. The sky above you, that brilliant, reassuring blue, is not infinite. It is a layer. A thin, delicate envelope of gases wrapped around the Earth with a depth, relative to the planet's size, no thicker than the skin of an apple. That fragility should take your breath away, and yet we rarely think about it. The Sumerian tablets suggest that the Anunnaki thought about it constantly, because they had already watched it fail. According to the cuneiform records, Nibiru, the Anunnaki homeworld, was experiencing catastrophic atmospheric deterioration. The specific cause is not described in terms a modern physicist would recognize, but the consequence is clear: their world was becoming uninhabitable, and they needed a solution capable of operating on a planetary scale. The solution proposed in the tablets, and attributed to the Anunnaki leader Anu, was to seed their upper atmosphere with particles of gold, a material uniquely suited to reflecting radiation and preventing atmospheric escape. The physics underlying this idea are not fantasy. Modern climate scientists have seriously proposed stratospheric aerosol injection as a potential emergency measure for Earth's own atmospheric challenges. The principle, suspending reflective particles in the upper atmosphere to manage solar radiation, is scientifically grounded. The Anunnaki came to Earth not as invaders. They came as a civilization trying to survive. There is something in that realization that quietly reshapes the entire story. Every great migration in history has begun with need, with the understanding that home, as it was, could no longer sustain the people who loved it. We protect what we cannot afford to lose. And sometimes, when the atmosphere of one world fails, you travel until you find another. Picture yourself driving on a long, dark highway late at night. The road stretches ahead into absolute blackness. You have been travelling for hours. The destination is real, you know it exists, but you cannot see it yet. All you have is direction, calculation, and the certainty that the journey has purpose. Now extend that journey across thousands of years of space. The Sumerian tablets describe Nibiru as a wandering planet, a world whose orbit carries it far beyond the outer edges of our solar system before looping back, every 3,600 years through the inner planets. The Sumerians called it the Planet of the Crossing, depicted in their astronomical seals as a winged disk moving through a celestial boundary. For much of the 20th century, the existence of a large, undiscovered planet in our outer solar system was considered fringe speculation. Then something shifted. In 2016, astronomers Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown at the California Institute of Technology published research demonstrating that the unusual orbital clustering of distant trans-Neptunian objects, small bodies in the far outer solar system, could be best explained by the gravitational influence of an undetected planet. They called it Planet 9. Based on mathematical modelling, they estimated its orbital period at between 10,000 and 20,000 years, and its mass at approximately 10 times that of Earth. No physical confirmation has yet been made. But the gravitational evidence has only grown stronger since 2016. The Sumerians described a wandering planet with a long elliptical orbit returning to the inner solar system on a multi-thousand-year cycle. Modern astrophysicists are searching for exactly that. Two entirely separate lines of inquiry, separated by 5,000 years, converging on the same point in the sky. Some highways, it seems, have always led to the same destination. Think about a teacher you once had, not the loudest one, not the most dramatic, but the one who simply knew more than everyone else in the room and chose to share it gently, who never made you feel small for not knowing, who guided rather than governed and left you better than they found you. That quality, patient, knowledgeable, fundamentally generous, appears again and again in the Sumerian portrait of Enki. Among the Anunnaki, Enki occupied a role that modern readers might recognize as something between a scientist, an engineer, and a quietly subversive humanitarian. The tablets describe him as the Lord of Wisdom, the designer of living things, the keeper of the Mez, those sacred tablets of destiny containing the complete blueprint for civilized life. Crucially, Enki did not hoard this knowledge. The texts describe him distributing the Mez, gifts of civilization including writing, mathematics, music, law and agriculture, to the human cities of ancient Sumer, not reluctantly, not transactionally, but with the apparent intention that humanity should flourish. Anthropologists have long puzzled over the extraordinary speed with which Sumerian civilization developed. Cities, writing, formal law codes, astronomical observation, musical notation, surgical procedures, all appearing within a historically compressed period, without the long developmental runway that other civilizations required. The gentleness of the oversight described in the Enki narratives is perhaps its most surprising quality. There is no coercion in his gifts, no conditions, no hierarchy of worthiness. Good teachers do not give knowledge as a reward. They give it because knowledge is, by its nature, meant to be shared. Whatever the origin of Sumerian civilization's extraordinary flowering, the tradition it left behind insists that at its root was not conquest, not control, but a quiet, deliberate act of generosity. Imagine arriving at your workplace one morning and finding, without warning or negotiation, that everyone has simply stopped, not angrily, not violently, but with a collective, quiet, absolute certainty that the current arrangement is finished. Tools laid down, hands folded, eyes steady. That kind of uprising, calm, total, and impossible to argue with, is far more powerful than any riot. The Sumerian tablets record exactly this moment, and it is one of the most quietly extraordinary passages in the entire ancient literary tradition. The Igigi, the rank-and-file Anunnaki workers assigned to the labour of gold mining on Earth had been at it for thousands of years. The tablets describe them working in the mines of the Abzu, beneath the Earth, in conditions that even their long-lived physiology found oppressive. And then, one day, they stopped. The text known as the Atrahasis Epic describes the Ajiji burning their tools and surrounding the house of Enlil in the night, not with weapons, but with presence, with the simple, immovable fact of their refusal. Enlil, confronted with this, calls a council, and it is at this council that the idea of creating a human worker is first formally proposed, a being capable enough to perform the labour, but not so capable as to threaten the divine order. What followed, according to the tablets, was the creation of humanity itself. Consider the implications of that quietly. Every human being alive today may owe their existence to a labour dispute that occurred before recorded history, to a group of workers who simply, peacefully put down their tools and said, "Enough." There is something almost tender in that origin. We were not created from divine whim or cosmic accident. We were created because someone, somewhere, refused to continue without relief. Picture the way sunlight falls through the canopy of a forest. It does not force its way in. It filters, gently, diffusely, reaching the forest floor in pools and patterns that nourish without overwhelming. The trees do not resist it. They grow toward it, instinctively, without being commanded. That is a particular kind of power that shapes without announcing itself. The Anunnaki relationship with early humanity, as described across the breadth of Sumerian literature, was rarely one of overt force. The tablets do not primarily depict gods commanding humans at sword point. They depict something subtler and, in its own way, more complete, a civilization so far in advance of early humanity that its influence operated almost invisibly, like that filtered forest light. The Anunnaki established the Sumerian temple system, the ziggurats, as both dwelling places and administrative centres. Priests and priestesses served as intermediaries, receiving instruction and transmitting it downward through a carefully maintained hierarchy. The average Sumerian would rarely, if ever, have encountered an Anunnaki directly. Their presence was mediated through ritual, through law, through the very structure of the city itself. Sociologists studying the earliest urban centres have noted that Sumerian cities were organised with a consistency that suggests a single underlying design philosophy, a set of principles applied across multiple cities simultaneously. Urban planning, water management, food distribution, legal codes, all reflecting the same foundational logic. Dominion expressed not through fear, but through organisation is, in many ways, the most enduring form of influence. It becomes invisible because it becomes normal, because it becomes the shape of daily life. We do not question the architecture we were born inside, we simply inhabit it and call it home. Suppose you discovered, tucked inside an old family home during renovation, a set of architectural drawings for the building that were clearly older than the building itself. The dimensions match exactly. The structural logic is identical. But the paper is ancient, impossibly, inexplicably ancient. Someone drew the plan before anyone built the house. How do you explain a blueprint that precedes its own construction? The Sumerian tablets describe the Mes, those sacred objects or tablets of divine knowledge, in precisely these terms. They are presented not as inventions, but as pre-existing blueprints. Civilization, in the Sumerian understanding, did not develop organically. It was implemented. The Mes contained the complete specifications for every institution of organized human life: kingship, priesthood, writing, music, law, descent into the underworld, the crafts of the smith, the mason, the scribe. Enki held the maze in his underwater realm, the Abzu, and from there he distributed them to the cities of Sumer as he saw fit. This idea that civilization is not invented but revealed appears in strikingly similar forms across multiple ancient traditions. The Egyptian concept of Maat, the divine order underlying all reality, carries the same implication, that the principles of correct civilization are not human discoveries but cosmic givens. The Vedic tradition describes the universe itself as constructed according to pre-existing divine patterns. Modern theoretical physics, in a fascinating parallel, has increasingly described the laws of the universe as mathematical structures that appear to exist independently of the physical universe they govern, as if the equations preceded the matter they describe. Blueprints, it seems, have a way of existing before the buildings they describe. Perhaps civilization was never truly invented. Perhaps it was always already waiting, encoded somewhere just beyond the reach of human hands, until the right moment to be given. Picture walking into an ancient temple for the first time. The proportions feel immediately, inexplicably right. The height of the ceiling, the width of the corridor, the way light enters at a specific angle at a specific time of day. Your body registers something your mind has not yet processed. A sense of order so precise it feels almost biological. Sacred geometry is not decoration. It is communication in a language older than words. The Sumerian tablets describe the construction of temples according to divine specifications, measurements and proportions delivered directly by the Anunnaki to human builders. The ziggurat, the stepped temple mountain of ancient Mesopotamia, was not designed for human comfort. It was designed as a landing platform, an administrative centre, and a symbolic axis connecting earth to sky. The mathematical principles embedded in ancient sacred architecture have fascinated scholars for centuries. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the value of pi in the ratio of its perimeter to its height. The dimensions of the Parthenon reflect the golden ratio, that mathematically unique proportion appearing throughout nature in the spiral of a shell, the branching of a tree, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. These proportions do not appear because ancient builders thought they were beautiful. They appear because ancient builders understood at some fundamental level that these ratios reflect the underlying structure of the natural world. That building, according to them, creates spaces that resonate with the deepest patterns of existence. The Sumerians called this alignment with cosmic order a form of worship. Modern mathematicians call it optimization. Biologists call it emergence. The language changes. The proportions remain constant. Whatever intelligence first taught human hands to build according to these ratios understood something profound, that geometry is not invented, it is discovered, and some discoveries are ancient enough to feel like memory. Imagine planting a seed in the dark earth and then spending the next 6 months watching the sky, learning which stars signal the right season to water, which planetary position signals the coming frost, which configuration of the moon determines the best night to harvest. Imagine that the sky is not just a backdrop to your farm, but its actual calendar. That is not primitive superstition. That is sophisticated systems thinking. The Sumerian tablets describe agriculture as a gift from the Anunnaki, specifically from the goddess Nisaba, associated with grain, and from Enki's agricultural management of the Earth's fertile zones. The introduction of systematic farming in ancient Mesopotamia is recorded not as a gradual human development, but as a transmission, knowledge given, tools provided, techniques demonstrated. The agricultural practices recorded in Sumerian texts are striking for their completeness. The world's oldest known agricultural manual, the Farmer's Almanac of ancient Sumer, dating to roughly 1700 years before the Common Era, contains advice so specific and practically sound that agricultural historians have described it as reflecting a tradition of at least several centuries of accumulated, carefully organized knowledge. But more than farming technique, the Sumerians understood the cosmic dimension of agriculture. Their planting calendars were built on precise astronomical observation, tracking the heliacal rising of specific stars that reliably signaled seasonal shifts in the Mesopotamian climate. Modern biodynamic farming, a contemporary agricultural approach with a growing body of scientific support, operates on precisely this principle, that the rhythms of the moon and stars have measurable effects on plant growth, soil biology, and harvest quality. The sky and the soil have always spoken the same language. The Sumerians simply listened to both at once and built a civilization on the conversation between them. Picture lying awake in the deepest part of the night, that quiet hour when the world has gone completely still. And in that stillness, a thought arrives, not constructed, not searched for, but simply present, whole and clear, as if it had been waiting just outside the door of your sleeping mind. You do not know where it came from, but you know, with unusual certainty, that it is true. The Sumerians would have called that a signal. Throughout the Sumerian tablet tradition, the boundary between divine communication and human consciousness is described as permeable, a membrane rather than a wall. The Anunnaki did not only communicate through priests and kings, they communicated through dreams, through visions, through the particular quality of silence in a sacred space. The Sumerian word for ear, geshtug, was also used to mean wisdom. To hear, in ancient Mesopotamian thought, was to understand, and the deepest hearing happened not during waking life, but in the state between sleep and consciousness that the ancients treated as a sacred threshold. Modern neuroscience has documented the hypnagogic state, the transitional phase between wakefulness and sleep, as a period of unusual creative and perceptual activity. Some of the most significant insights in scientific history have arrived in this state. The chemist August Keckel discovered the ring structure of benzene in a hypnagogic vision. The mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan famously attributed his extraordinary mathematical insights to dreams. What if the Sumerians were not describing supernatural intervention? What if they were describing, in the language available to them, a real phenomenon, a channel of information that operates most clearly when the ordinary noise of the waking mind grows quiet? The signal was always there. Sometimes you simply have to fall almost asleep to hear it. Think about a ritual you perform every single day, something so routine it has become invisible. The particular order in which you make your morning coffee, the route you walk to clear your head, the small, repeated gesture that signals to your body and your mind that a certain kind of time has begun. Rituals are not superstition. They are technology. Precision tools for organizing consciousness. The Sumerian civilization was saturated with ritual, and the tablets make clear that these rituals were not human inventions, but inherited forms. The daily ceremonies performed in Sumerian temples, the seasonal festivals tied to astronomical events, the elaborate protocols governing interaction with the divine, all of these were described in the texts as having been established by the Anunnaki themselves and transmitted to human priests as exact prescriptions. This matters because it explains the extraordinary consistency of ritual practice across cultures that had no known contact. The ritual washing before entering sacred space appears in Sumerian temples, Egyptian sanctuaries, Hindu practice, and Shinto tradition alike. The use of specific aromatic substances, resins, incense, herbs, to mark sacred time is equally universal. Archaeologists studying the oldest known ritual sites, including Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and the cave sanctuaries of southern Europe, have noted that the ritual behaviours evidence there appear already fully formed. There is no developmental period visible in the archaeological record. The rituals, like the cities, arrive complete. What is a ritual, ultimately, but a set of instructions passed forward through time, a way of saying, do this, in this order, at this moment, and something important will be preserved. The Sumerians preserved what they were given, and the echoes of those inherited forms still move through human ceremony today, in churches and temples and quiet morning kitchens, across the full and unbroken length of human time. Settle into this thought for a moment. Imagine that someone created you, not carelessly, not as an afterthought, but with genuine care. that they spent real effort designing the conditions of your existence, that they argued about what you would need to flourish, that even those among them who had reservations ultimately participated in your making because the situation demanded it. That is not the creation story most people expect from the ancient world, but it is remarkably close to what the Sumerian tablets actually describe. The creation of humanity in the Sumerian tradition is not a moment of casual divine whim. The tablets record debate, deliberation, and significant disagreement among the Anunnaki Council. Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag, also called Mami and Ninmah, are described as the principal architects of the human form. And the process, as recorded, involves genuine creative effort and repeated refinement. The Atrahasis epic describes several early attempts before a viable human model is achieved. Beings are created that are not quite right, too fragile, too strong, unable to reproduce, incapable of certain tasks. The goddess Ninmah holds the imperfect creations and weeps. Enki comforts her. They try again. This is creation described not as divine omnipotence, but as patient, tender, sometimes frustrated craftsmanship. It has the emotional texture not of mythology, but of memory. Modern genetics has noted that the human genome contains evidence of remarkably rapid, concentrated change in our evolutionary history, periods of accelerated modification that do not follow the expected gradual pace of natural selection. Whatever the mechanism of our origin, the Sumerian account insists on something worth holding, that we were made with care, that our existence was not accidental, that someone, somewhere in the deep past, thought we were worth the effort. That is a tender thing to carry into the world. Think about the last time someone you loved left, not in anger, not dramatically, but with the particular quiet gravity of a departure that both parties knew was permanent. The door closes, the footsteps fade, and the silence that follows has a different quality than ordinary silence. It carries weight. It holds the shape of the person who was there. The Sumerian tablets describe the departure of the Anunnaki with exactly that quality of weighted absence. The texts do not present a single decisive moment of leaving. The withdrawal is gradual, a slow recession of divine presence from human life that the later Sumerian texts document with unmistakable melancholy. The gods become less visible. Their instructions become less direct. The intermediary role of priest and king becomes more important precisely because the divine is becoming more distant. Scholars of ancient religion have noted a consistent pattern across the ancient Near East, a movement over time from direct, personal, anthropomorphic gods who walk among humans toward more abstract, distant divine principles accessible only through elaborate ritual and mediation. This transition happens in Sumer, in Egypt, in early Vedic religion, in the pre-Socratic Greek tradition. It reads less like theological evolution and more like an accurate description of something actually withdrawing. The Sumerian lament texts, a remarkable literary genre in which entire cities mourn the departure of their patron deity, are among the most emotionally powerful documents in all of ancient literature. Their grief is specific, personal, and inconsolably real. You do not write laments that specific for an idea. You write them for someone who was truly there and is now inexplicably, irreversibly gone. The most ancient silences still carry that weight, and sometimes in certain quiet places you can feel exactly what shape of presence they were designed to hold. Suppose you found yourself sitting in a beautiful park, watching the world move around you, children playing, birds crossing the sky, the slow arc of afternoon light, and realized that no one in the scene was aware of your presence. Not because you were hidden, but because you had become, somehow, part of the background, familiar enough to be invisible. What would that feel like, to watch and not be seen? The Sumerian tablets in their later narratives describe a class of Anunnaki who remained on Earth after the main withdrawal, not as rulers or overseers, but as observers. Watchers. Beings who had, for reasons not entirely clear in the texts, chosen not to depart with the others, or been assigned to continue monitoring the human civilization they had set in motion. The concept of divine watchers appears with striking consistency across ancient traditions. The Hebrew Book of Enoch, a text that draws heavily on Mesopotamian source material, describes the watchers explicitly, beings of immense longevity assigned to observe humanity from a position of deliberate detachment. The Zoroastrian tradition has its Yazaturs, divine beings who maintain the order of creation from a position of sustained, quiet vigilance. Even the Egyptian tradition describes certain divine presences who persist in a region after the primary gods have withdrawn. Ancient sites around the world, stone monuments, carved figures, inexplicable underground chambers, have sometimes been interpreted by researchers not as places of worship, but as places of observation. Vantage points, designed not to be looked at, but to look from. We have always sensed being watched. It is one of the oldest and most universal of human intuitions. Perhaps that intuition is not fear. Perhaps it is recognition, the faint, persistent awareness that somewhere in the background of human history, quiet and patient and enormously old, something is still paying attention. Hold a tuning fork to vibrate and then press it gently against a wooden surface. The sound does not stop the moment you remove the fork. It lingers, softening, yes, but present in the wood, in the air, in the resonating chamber of the space around you. The source is gone. But the vibration continues. That is what civilizations leave behind. Not just monuments and texts, but frequencies. Patterns of thought and practice so deeply embedded in human culture that they continue vibrating long after the source has departed. The Sumerian tablets are, in this sense, the original tuning fork of Western civilization. The legal frameworks first codified in the laws of Ur-Nammu, predating Hammurabi's famous code by centuries, contain principles still recognizable in modern jurisprudence: presumption of innocence, proportional punishment, the rights of the vulnerable, the Sumerian concept of divine kingship, the idea that legitimate governance derives from a higher authority than human consensus, shaped political philosophy from ancient Egypt through medieval Europe to the present day. The astronomical knowledge encoded in Sumerian star catalogues travelled through Babylonian, then Greek, then Arabic hands, before reaching the European Renaissance astronomers who gave us the foundations of modern celestial science. Every major institution of Western civilization, law, astronomy, mathematics, urban planning, written literature, formal religion, carries a Sumerian echo somewhere in its foundation, not as distant myth, but as functional inheritance. Echoes do not lie about their source. Follow any echo far enough back through the corridors of time, and you arrive, eventually, at the moment of original vibration. The Sumerians heard that original vibration clearly enough to write it down. And what they wrote down has never fully stopped resonating, moving forward through every civilization that followed, carrying its ancient frequency unchanged. Press 2 fingers gently against your wrist right now and feel it, that steady, patient rhythm that has been present since before you were born. Your heartbeat is so fundamental to your existence that you almost never notice it, and yet it organizes everything. It is the original clock, the pulse against which all other rhythms are measured. Civilizations have heartbeats too, and the oldest heartbeat we can still detect belongs to ancient Sumer. The Sumerian tablets describe a concept called me, pronounced may, that functions as something like the pulse of civilization itself. The me are not merely the laws or the technologies passed to humanity. They are the underlying animating principles, the rhythm of correct living, that give human society its coherence and its capacity to endure. Enki, as the keeper and distributor of the me, functions in this framework as something like the keeper of the heartbeat. Without the me, in Sumerian understanding, civilization does not slow or degrade. It simply stops, like a body whose pulse has ceased. This is a remarkable and surprisingly sophisticated model of cultural coherence. The idea that societies do not merely require resources and organization, but underlying principles that function as biological rhythms do, invisibly, continuously, and with catastrophic consequences when interrupted. Modern systems theorists describe something analogous when they speak of the deep values and assumptions embedded in a culture, the invisible architecture of shared meaning that makes collective life possible. When those deep assumptions are disrupted faster than a society can adapt, the result is not change, but collapse. The Sumerians knew this. They described the withdrawal of the me as the most profound possible catastrophe, worse than drought, worse than war. Because you can rebuild after drought, you can recover from war. But when the heartbeat stops, everything that depended on it stops with it. Think about the way certain knowledge passes between people, not in classrooms, not in books, but in quiet conversations. A grandmother's hand on a child's shoulder, voice low, sharing something that cannot be written down because its truth lives in the telling. Knowledge that travels not in documents but in the space between two people who trust each other completely. The deepest instructions have always been whispered. The Sumerian tablets describe Enki as a god who communicated with humanity not through proclamation, but through intimacy. When he warned Siusudra, the Sumerian Noah, of the coming flood, he did not appear in a blaze of divine light. He whispered through a reed wall. Technically, he addressed not the man but the wall, maintaining a precise deniability while ensuring the message arrived exactly where it was needed. This detail is so specific, so legally precise, so almost bureaucratically careful, that it strains the imagination to read it as pure myth. It reads like an account of someone who understood rules, who was operating within constraints, and who found the most creative possible path through them. Throughout the tablets, Enki's transmission of knowledge to humanity follows this same pattern: indirect, subtle, preserving just enough distance to remain defensible while ensuring the essential content gets through. He works through dreams, through chosen intermediaries, through objects and symbols that carry meaning without announcing it. The wisdom traditions of nearly every ancient culture share this quality of indirection. The teaching is embedded in the story rather than stated in the moral. The instruction arrives as metaphor rather than command. Perhaps this is because the deepest truths resist direct statement, not because they are too complex, but because they are too simple, too fundamental to survive the reduction of explicit declaration. Some things can only arrive as a whisper, and the walls they travel through remember every word. Watch a photograph left too long in direct sunlight. The colours do not vanish all at once. They fade gradually, the edges first, then the details, then the central image itself, until what remains is a pale impression, still recognisable in its general shape, but drained of the particularity that once made it vivid and real. That is how gods fade, not in defeat, but in dilution. The Sumerian tablets document, across their full historical range, exactly this process of divine recession. The early texts, dating to roughly 3,000 years before the Common Era, describe the Anunnaki with extraordinary specificity: their names, their family relationships, their disagreements, their physical characteristics, their particular domains of expertise. These are not abstractions, they are portraits. The later texts, composed as Sumerian culture gave way to Akkadian, then Babylonian, then Assyrian civilization, show a progressive generalization. The specific Anunnaki figures blur into broader divine categories. Their individual personalities flatten into archetypal functions. Enki becomes Neptune, becomes Poseidon, becomes a vague personification of water. Enlil becomes Zeus, becomes Jupiter, becomes the sky. The god of the earlier tablets, specific, complicated, fallible and present, becomes the god of theology, eternal, perfect and distant. Historians of religion call this process theologization, the gradual transformation of specific divine figures into abstract principles. it is understood as a natural development of religious thinking. And perhaps it is, but it is also possible to read it as an accurate record of something else entirely, not the evolution of human abstract thought, but the increasing distance of beings who had been genuinely, physically present and gradually, irreversibly, were not. When someone fades from your life over many years, you first lose the details. Then the voice. Then the face becomes an impression, and eventually, the impression becomes something closer to idea than memory. The gods did not become abstract because we grew more sophisticated. Perhaps they became abstract because they grew further away. Stand at the ocean on a clear morning and watch the tide come in. Wave after wave, each one reaching a little further up the shore, retreating, then returning. No wave is the same wave, and yet the tide itself is utterly consistent, governed by forces so vast and so regular that you could set a clock by them. That rhythm, departure and return, withdrawal and renewal, is written into the deepest structures of the universe. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki departure not as a permanent ending but as part of a cycle. The tablets tied the Anunnaki's comings and goings to the orbital period of Nibiru, that 3,600-year circuit that brought their world periodically within reach of Earth. Their arrival corresponded to one perihelion, their withdrawal to another. And the implicit logic of the cycle is that what departs on one orbit may return on the next. This cyclical cosmology, the idea that time moves not in a straight line but in spirals, that what has been will be again, is among the most universal of human philosophical intuitions. The Hindu concept of the Yuga cycles, the Mayan long count calendar with its recurring great cycles, the Greek conception of eternal return, all share this fundamental architecture. Modern cosmology has found cycles embedded at every scale of physical reality, the expansion and possible contraction of the universe, the life cycles of stars, the orbital mechanics of every body in the solar system. Periodicity is not a human projection onto nature, it is nature's own deepest grammar. If the Anunnaki departed on a schedule governed by cosmic mechanics, then their absence is not permanent. It is simply the long, quiet phase of the cycle, the tide pulled all the way back before the next great wave gathers itself in the deep. We may be living in the interval, waiting, without quite knowing it, for the return, and perhaps that waiting is itself the most human thing about us.